Hey guys, I'm Wom. I'm doing the presentation for this week on the apprenticeship perspective. This is my first time with iMovie, so just keep that in mind. Let's do this. Okay, the apprenticeship perspective. This map sort of shows that the teacher and content are in the same context, and I think that's really important, and it's sort of a theme that gets echoed throughout the apprenticeship program. If you're an apprentice, you're learning how to be what the teacher is already. So, in a way, they are what is being taught, and so they're not actually different from the content. At the same way, you're learning how to solve a problem in the context of the problem. Now, if we compare this to the other learning perspective that we've learned, in which the teacher and the context are separate, we can see that there's a drastically different way of teaching because in this other perspective, we're inferring content onto a learner from a perspective outside of the problem. So the big question that we're looking to answer is why remove the problem from its context? This is a quote from Pratt and Johnson, which I think is relevant. Instead of taking problems out of the context of their creation and providing them with an extraneous framework, just plain folks seem particularly adept at solving them within the framework of the context that produced them. Brings us back to the opening map. Just the idea that if you're looking to learn something, to solve a problem, then you need to work with the problem directly in order to solve it. So, according to Pratt, there's three modes of successful apprenticeship practice. They involve being active, social, and authentic practice. So, let's get into these and see what they mean. So when we talk about active apprenticeship, we're talking about the level to which a learner is physically and mentally stimulated within the environment. So it's really talking about being hands-on. I use the example of someone learning to drive a car here to show that the only way to really learn to drive a car is to drive a car. So when we're talking about the sociability aspect, what we're really looking at is that the learner is engaged with their customers, with the other people they're working with the entire field around them. So the students must interact constantly with the tools for success. The teachers, the beneficiaries of the work, they need to see the holistic mode of everything that they're doing working together. Now, the third aspect, authenticity, is what really got my attention and is what made me want to talk about the historical analysis. So, this is sort of the establishment of a mental connection between the work of a student in a particular field and the comprehension of the greater public. More or less, it gives the framework for the student, that way that they fit into society, and it makes the work that they're doing real. It's not nut and bolt work, it's very much a creative problem. What interested me most about this theory is how much it reminded me of Karl Marx's alienation theory. According to Marx, there's four types of alienation: alienation of the worker from the work, alienation of the worker from working, alienation of the worker from himself as a producer, and alienation of the worker from other workers. Basically, the idea is that capitalism reduces the labor of the worker to a commercial commodity that can be traded in the competitive labor market rather than as a constructive, socio-economic activity that is part of the collective common effort performed for personal survival and the betterment of society. In a capitalist economy, the businessman who owns the means of production establish a competitive labor market meant to extract from the worker as much labor value as possible in the form of capital. The reason that this is relevant is because when I look at the transmission learning perspective, it brings up a lot of similar nodes. For example, just to sort of disconnect between what is being learned, why we're learning it, the setting it's being learned in, learning to be a doctor in a classroom. To me, the apprenticeship, it's time proven to be an effective teaching method. It's the best way to learn how to solve a problem, and it works directly with the problem. It doesn't aim to remove it. One of my favorite philosophers of all time, Krishnamurti, he lived in India and during the 1900s. He said, if we can really understand the problem, the answer will come out of it, because the answer is not separate from the problem. What apprenticeship aims to do is to learn through directly engaging with the problem. So that leaves pretty much the end of my presentation. I guess I'll leave you with a few questions for the discussion for this week. My first question is, why do you think that the apprenticeship program is no longer as prevalent as it used to be? Back in the day, people would train to be doctors and masons and whatnot by going and being an apprentice rather than going to school. Do you think that it's somehow economical? and money motivated that we now have so many institutions that play that intermediary role between the problem and learning. And the second question that I have today is, can you think of any professions that the apprenticeship style of learning wouldn't be a useful training method for? Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. And any questions that you have, shoot them at me. Take care.